many of you thought it's their life, they should be allowed to do it. But what was the counterpoint on this?
That's the limit.
Where's the limit? What do you mean?
Can anyone just say, I don't want to live? So
Can anyone say, I don't want to live? Could somebody that's 18 make
Yeah.
this decision?
Yeah.
Does it just have to be the older folks? Go ahead, Dan.
There's also that some people were worried that relatives might try to pressure older people, their family members, to commit suicide.
That was the bottom piece down here, and it really is kind of bad. It mentions down here, if we allow assisted suicide for people whose only affliction is being old, we run a huge risk that greedy relations will put pressure on the elderly to choose to die for the convenience and the enrichment of heirs. It goes on about where would be the limit, talking about other injuries, depression, if somebody was having a bad day, these kinds of things. And this is really where you start getting into statism, because when you think about it, you could make an argument that these would be folks that would not be contributing to society, whether it's their mental or their physical or their age or whatever it might be. And if you start allowing people to do this, what's to say that the government could not take the next step and decide for them that they're not at the level that they should be to be able to contribute? What was the other really big article that we had talked about with this?
Death panel.
We had talked about the death panels. What was the story with the death panels, as you remember?
The kidney treatment on dialysis.
It was the kidney treatment. And what was the story? I mean, what exactly was a death panel? Because, we heard the Republicans talk about this during health care, and we kind of laughed it off. Where was this?
It was wasn't it in like Seattle or something?
Washington State, yes.
Yes, and it was a preacher, a housewife.
Well, wait. What is a death panel? Well, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
It was the preacher, the housewife, the lawyer, and the doctor, and they would determine your social worth.
Well, let's make sure we got it specific. You had two committees. One of them was a medical committee that would decide if you could get the kidney, the dialysis. And it was very expensive, and if you didn't get it, basically you were going to die, hence the name death panel. So basically this first committee, and they considered the medical element of it. They considered your age. They considered, the idea that you would be able to survive the treatment. The God committee, or the death panel part of this, though, was they were going to consider what? Your social worth. So the first one was going to figure out if you were going to live, and then the second one was going to figure out if you were worth it to live, meaning you would be able to give something back to society. And to your point, pastor, lawyer, union leader, homemaker, 2 doctors, and a businessman would basically determine this. And in fact, if they selected you for the dialysis, you still weren't guaranteed to live, but it was obviously a much better chance. And everybody that they selected against that did not get the dialysis died. What was the moral of the argument? Because really, it's saying that there were death panels, but what's the moral of the argument that this article is bringing? Because he was talking about money, right?
Right.
What was the moral with the money?
Who's to say what your social worth is?
Wasn't that? Because y'all got mad about determining what somebody's...
What is the price of life?
Well,
Life doesn't have a price.
it basically is talking about government involvement in healthcare. And this article basically says that the Republicans are saying if government gets involved, it's going to make it worse. But in terms of dialysis, Congress ended up funding money so that we don't have these death panels anymore. So the moral is when government gets involved, healthcare benefits can actually expand. The trick, though, is resources. And it says in here, when government provides the resources, then this expands. But the question that I asked you was, are those resources there today when you consider the state of the country? And that's where the feeling begins to get a little bit more mixed. If the resources are there, fine. But I don't know that they're there when you consider the level of debt and the economic slowdown and some of these other things. So even this, while it's a good thing, can be dangerous. But it relates to statism because of the idea that we're determining your social worth to determine if you should continue to live. What other questions do y'all have from the terms?
You didn't get to this earlier, but the legitimacy.
What was legitimacy? Because legitimacy is one of those tricky ones. It's not just that you gain power, because everybody can gain power. Go ahead.
Was it? Oh wait, maybe it's not. I'm not sure. Was it like? Were we talking about? No, never mind. It wasn't that.
Go ahead, man.
Legitimacy is basically like how legally the process goes.
Yeah.
Conferring power.
It's not just that you gain power, but it's the idea that you gain power by lawful means. And I had given you the example in class. If a dictator comes in and overthrows the government and then makes wonderful policies, is that legitimate?
No.
And the argument is, even if this dictator comes in and makes positive decisions and changes around the country, that is not legitimate because they did a coup. They took power by force. When you think about the democratically elected leader, or the leader that maybe isn't democratically elected but takes power within the specific system, if you take power according to the rules, even if you go in there and do a lousy job, you're a legitimate ruler because it's not based on your outcomes, it's based on how you got into office. And those two articles that I gave you were Ghana and this one about Egypt. And what was the trick with Ghana?
That he won by like a really small number of votes. And
Yeah.
They could have said, I mean, if it was America, we would have been like, oh no, we need a recount.
Yeah.
But he just stepped back and handed the presidency over.
The numbers were 50.23 to 49.77. And we don't think about this. And I try and give you some countries that we don't necessarily think about. But it says up here, Ghana is now one of the few African countries to successfully transfer power twice from one legitimately elected leader to another. So Party A wins an election. Next election, Party B wins an election. Next election, Party A maybe takes back power, or even Party C gets it. The idea that you've actually transferred power legitimately twice is something that a lot of African nations haven't seen. And it even goes on up here, and it says, this is the guy from James Madison, the first case in Africa I can think of where a country has seen two successive transfers of power from democratically elected incumbents to democratically elected successors or challengers. 50.2% in a razor-thin election, and the incumbent that had 49.77 basically just said, you know what, I'm going to respect the rules, I'm going to stand down, and the new party is going to come in and lead. That is legitimate. Then you got Egypt up here, if you remember, who were basically busing people in. Not even, it was argued, 25% of the people were voting on some of the referendums to give, at this time, Mubarak more power, dictatorial power, in fact. There's an argument there that even though those passed, it was not a legitimate election, and everybody, even the monkeys in the zoo, if you remember when I had read this off, knew that they were cheating on this. What other questions do y'all have? And I think we've more or less covered the terms now. Do you have any questions about any of the articles from chapter 4?
I don't think so.
I'm trying to remember which part of the terms was the Islamic retribution article.
Islamic retribution is in this one. And when we were dealing with Islamic retribution, we were dealing with examples of politics. We were dealing with examples of politics, if you remember. What was Islamic retribution? Because that was a good one.
Wasn't that the acid in our island?
Yeah, what's the story?
This guy stalked this girl and she didn't like him and she was nice to him, and then one day when he like asked her to marry him, she said no and he just threw acid in her face.
Okay, that's kind of the nutshell of it. For some of these articles, there's going to be a story on these. And you'll notice that for some of the questions that I give you short answer-wise, there's going to be more to say than others. So if you get a short answer question that's talking about the characteristics of a weak or a strong or an effective state, there's only so much that you can say. So be careful if you take that one, because you almost need to write everything we've talked about. With this one, though, if you get a short answer about Islamic retribution, there's a lot that can be said, and you can really write yourself some curve on this. When you think about it, there was an Iranian woman who was enrolled in college, enrolled in university. Nice girl, a little bit of a hottie, depending upon what your preference would be, I guess. There was nothing, she was a career person, nothing wrong with her, and she was an educated person. I mean, she had a lot to offer. She befriended somebody that was a little bit more of a recluse, a male student, and some of her friends did as well, and he became smitten with her. She would not go out with him, she would not marry him to be sure, and when she said no to his marriage proposal, in fact, he told her what? If I can't have you, then nobody else will either. And it was at that point that he tapped her on the shoulder in the coming days after this exchange and threw acid on her face, which basically deformed and blinded her. Took away a lot of those prospects for career, for marriage, even for life as she had known it. What is Islamic retribution?
The eye for an eye principle.
The eye for an eye principle. So basically, if somebody commits a crime against you, in theory, you have the right